Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to The Back Row from What I Watched Tonight. It's my show to discuss movies I think are great with someone who happens to share the same opinion. And joining me in the back row tonight, well, it's the finest film teacher in the land, in the world, in the galaxy, in the universe, and the statesman to my Kingsman, it's Jon Berk of BerkReviews.com. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing pretty well, man. Thanks for that overly kind intro. I appreciate all the sentiment.
Now, anyone who's heard Jon's work or heard of Jon speaking about film will know that I'm telling the truth there. And anyone who's heard us speaking before on the Bloody Awesome Movie Podcast or Movie Astrology or any other shows we've done together will know that we've been podcasting and speaking films and been buddies for a couple of years now. But for those who aren't aware of BerkReviews.com and what you do in film, can you give the guys a little rundown?
Sure. I started Berk Reviews in 2016 with a challenge to watch a movie a day for the entire year. So it was 366 movies. 300, whatever. It was a leap year that year. And I ended up watching more because I got really into it, especially during the summertime when I was off from my job. I teach film, and I've been teaching film now for just over 6 or 7 years. And after the first few years where I knew movies, I realized I had a long way to really know movies. So I started academically studying them and watching as many as I could, and especially branching out because I was, I'd seen a lot of movies before that, but I had definitely found myself rewatching a lot of the same movies. I had my favorites, and those are the ones I went to. And I saw major gaps, and so that was kind of the motivation for Berk Reviews, was to push myself to watch things that maybe I always just assumed I wouldn't like, or I was kind of shy towards older movies or even international films because of the subtitles. And documentaries were films that I often avoided. I had the nature doc as the only framework in my head of what a documentary could be. So over the last 5 years of doing Berk Reviews and pushing myself, I've watched a lot of movies that I had never seen before, found some new favorites, been to many film festivals, really gotten into the indie scene. I love watching a lot of indie films, and I've become a huge fan of the auteur theory, which is that the director is the author of the film, and that if with the right directors, you will hear/see their voice in their work. The obvious ones like Tarantino or Hitchcock or Wes Anderson, where they have a very distinctive visual style, but also like storytelling and things like that. So it's become my singular focus in life, basically, is I watch a lot of movies, talk about a lot of movies, both for podcast purposes and then for my students. We spend a lot of time analyzing film, making our own films. More of them. I'm not so much a filmmaker as I am just an encourager of the art. But yeah, that's been my my last couple of years.
Well, in 2.5 minutes, JB's already outshone anything I've ever said on this show. As I said, he's got a way of words, and when it comes to talking about film, Jon is a man who likes to talk about it, and that's how we like it on this show. And tonight, on Retrospectives, we're talking about a film which JB actually turned me on to a few years ago, but we'll tell the story shortly. But we're talking Blindspotting from 2018. So before we get into everything that myself and Jon love about it, let's get the admin out of the way. So Blindspotting was directed by Carlos Lopez Estrada in his directorial debut, and he's also set to direct the live-action Disney Robin Hood flick. And it stars Daveed Diggs as Colin Hoskins, Rafael Casal as Miles, Janina Gavankar as Val, Jasmine Cephas-Jones as Ashley, and Ethan Embry as Officer Molina. Premiered on January the 18th, 2018 at Sundance and went wide on July the 20th. Box office, worldwide it made $5 million, which is a criminal amount of money. And the synopsis, it follows a parolee with 3 days left on his sentence, only to have him witness a police shooting that threatens to ruin a lifelong friendship. Now, if you haven't seen Blindspotting, Jon and myself, we are going to go full spoiler in this. We're going to be talking about everything we loved about the film, maybe a few things we didn't at the end, if there are anything. So we're going to be diving into every aspect of it. So if you haven't seen Blindspotting, please do go and get a copy of it. Watch it, come back and listen to us. So finally, spoilers. So with that out of the way, Jon, Blindspotting, why does this rank so highly for you in your league of film?
Well, it just clicked with my sensibilities, like in every way. There's music integrated into it. There's culture. There's a lot of humor. The friendship between Colin and Miles is very genuine, and that is because in real life, Rafael Casal and David Diggs wrote the script together. They are friends, and so that chemistry just blends really well. And um, it kind of reminded me of Friday. In a little bit, like I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Friday with Ice Cube and Chris Tucker, but when I was a
Oh, I
kid,
have not.
it's from like the early '90s. It's Ice Cube's first script, and I was a fan of it most of high school. Like I watched it. It was one of the ones I would cycle through, and that movie has something to say, but it's definitely heavily focused more on the humor, and the message is secondary. Where Blindspotting, the message is at first secondary. It is not, the movie doesn't come across as this is going to be a social problem film, um, but then it becomes one as you watch the film, and I love that element of it. I think there's a lot of interesting visual styles in the movie, which I also think could make some people not like this film. But I like Carlos had directed some music videos before this, and I think you see that in some of the sequences in the film, and it lends itself really well to those musical scenes. Now they're not songs in the traditional sense, and that's also something I really like about it. It's more spoken word poetry, with a hip hop flavor that Rafael and David brings to the picture. Um, I think it covers so many topics, and I've seen this film. I think officially on Letterboxd I've logged it 6 times. I am fairly sure I've watched it 7 because I taught it, and I don't always log when I teach a film because I'm not watching it like in a traditional sense. Um, and so I showed it to my film. They just graduated. They were my seniors last year, but I showed it to them the year before. And every time I've seen the movie, I realize the name Blindspotting and how embedded what that word means that is defined in the film, but I'll hold off on saying it for now. There's a lot of layers in the movie where that idea is completely going from the beginning of the movie. The idea of what Blindspotting means, and I love a film that can do that. That has so much nuance and subtext, while at the same time on its surface just being a good buddy comedy.
Yeah.
It's just I find some social problem films are hard to rewatch, right? Like because it's so heavy or it's so emotionally draining, and there are moments in this film that shatter me or stress me out. But the journey to getting to those moments is so much fun, and I like being a part of their world that I don't mind rewatching it. Like every time I rewatch it, it's a great experience. I still have those emotional reactions at those moments, but I'm also just enjoying the ride. And I don't know if you can say that about a lot of films that have such a important message, and right now especially it rings so true. Right now, the movie was written in response to I always forget Oscar's name but if you've seen Fruitvale Station, the Ryan Coogler Michael B. Jordan collaboration from 2009, the shooting of the guy that movie's about, it's Oscar something. I feel awful that I always forget his last name, but inspired David and Rafael. So they were working on the script for several years before they finally were able to make the movie. And David's success with Hamilton got him the ability to finance the film and get the financing they needed to make it happen. And just all of those things, just it's a perfect whirlpool of a movie, right place, right time. It was, if you listen to the Bloody Awesome Movie Podcast Best of the Decade episode, this was my movie of the decade, I think. I have no hesitation in that. Even it beat what I usually call my favorite film, which is Scott Pilgrim versus the World. It even managed to beat that for the best of the decade, which is making me question myself. It might be that if I watch Blindspotting as many times as I've seen Scott Pilgrim, that it'll become my favorite movie. Scott Pilgrim's a lot lighter, right?
Yeah.
So it's a little easier to digest overall. But I'm a big fan of what these guys did with this movie. I really hope they collaborate again on another film. I would even love just to see Collins and Miles like the day after kind of thing,
Yeah.
But I just love it, man. Everything about it. I love talking about it. And the thing that I love and hate is how many people haven't seen it. And like I love being able to recommend it to those people. But I also like, it seems like because it had very little publicity, very little marketing, that a lot of people don't know it. And the biggest thing that's been helping with pushing it is Hamilton going to Disney Plus, because I'm just like, hey, you like the guy who played Jefferson? Check this out,
Honestly, everything you've just said, I stand completely. Especially, and I mean, movies that provide commentary on a range of issues, I find sometimes tend to fall down at some point. But Blindspotting manages to, it stays strong because it depicts race, authority, masculinity, violence, and it's a massive compliment to the writing and the direction that it maintains its focus and stays on that trajectory the whole way and doesn't waver. Even like you mentioned, it is like a buddy comedy sort of slash hard-hitting hybrid, but it stays fresh, and it's unfortunately fresh now, unfortunately very, very relevant. But it's not sanctimonious either. It feels authentic, it feels raw, it feels real. It doesn't feel like it was just made for the screen. And like you said, a lot of that comes from Casal and Diggs, like childhood friendship and being brought up in the Oakland area, which this film takes place, and seeing the gentrification of that area. But you mentioned not enough people have seen this film, which I wholly agree with. I would never have seen this film, or certainly not as soon as I did, if it wasn't for you. But for those who don't know the story, when did you first see this film?
I was at South by Southwest 2018, and I saw it at one of the big opening nights for it, and David and Rafael and Carlos were all in attendance, and then did a Q&A afterwards. So I got the best experience I possibly could have. I didn't have the best seat. I had this, I can't remember the name of the theater. It starts with a P, but it's also like a stage, like, so they have like live performances and stuff in the same theater. And so where my seat was, I had a speaker that was partially obstructing the view of the screen, like in the right side, not badly, but enough that for me, it was annoying, because I go to a lot of movies, so I'm not used to, nothing's supposed to be in front of the screen. You know what I'm saying? Like, but I don't remember. I was trying to remember exactly what day. I mean, it's been over 2 years since I saw it at South by, and I was trying to remember like what else I'd seen that day, because most of my time there, I got to see some really awesome movies that year. Like I saw 8th Grade,
Nice.
Never Going Back. 8th Grade had Bo Burnham and Elsie Fisher in the audience, did a Q&A afterwards. Like I had a lot of really cool moments like that. But there was at least 1 or 2 days where like the movie choices weren't my best, and I didn't love what I saw. And I was trying to remember if Blindspotting was like the cap of an already awesome day, or if it was like the savior of a mediocre day. You know what I mean? Because I was there for 9 days at that festival. I saw a lot of movies at South by Southwest, and I do know that when I saw Blindspotting, though, Paramount was the name of the theater, I'm pretty sure. I was so blown away. Like I knew walking out that it was going to be my favorite movie of the theater. Of the festival, favorite movie of the festival, also at that theater though, where I would also see American Animals though, at that same theater that later that week. But it was immediately moved to the number 1 spot for that year. It held that spot through the rest of the year. Keep in mind, South by Southwest was in March. I think it was late March. Yeah. And it held its spot the entire year for me. And I saw a lot of movies in 2018. That was probably one of my busiest review years, because I went to that festival. I went to Tribeca for the first time, and I covered the Florida Film Festival. So I saw like a whole bunch of movies that year from the year, and Blindspotting just stayed on top. It's a movie that has never left me. I bought it as soon as I was able to buy it. I taught it as soon as I was able to teach it. It's easily one of my favorite films ever, and it all goes to that night, man. When I saw it, I remember as soon as the credits hit, I was like, I just witnessed something that will stick with me forever. Mm-hmm. And there's not a lot of movies that get to do that to you, you know, where like you see it and you're instantly like, this is one of my favorite movies, like all time. And Blindspotting did that for me immediately. It hit all of my check boxes of what I need for a movie to do. I was instantly drawn into the characters. I've been to San Francisco. I don't think I've explored Oakland at all. You know, there's still something about the West Coast that I'm familiar with through film, but also through my own experience. And I just was like completely sucked in. So first experience, seeing it at South by just cemented it as an important film for me.
I remember when we did the South by Southwest preview before you went along. I remember jumping on about 1 a.m. British time to record that episode. We went through some of the films that were coming out, and like, what did we think of the synopsis and what do we think may be sort of the front runners for the festival. I don't recall talking about Blindspotting. We may have done. I don't really recall Blindspotting coming up in our conversation, but I remember when you came back from South by, you were talking about this film called Blindspotting. You've got to see Blindspotting. You've got to see it. Okay, I'll track down a copy. I'll keep Berk happy. You know what I mean? I'll shut him up for a bit. And so I went and found a copy, and bloody hell, it's powerful. And I know we're going to speak about our moments, but had it not been for JB who recommended the film, I think he deserves a slice of the royalties, because I think he's been banging the drum since 2018. But I don't know when I would have seen this film. I'm sure I would have at some point, but I saw it as soon as I could, given Jon's recommendation. It was probably a lot earlier than I would have done. And I can only say how grateful I am, because the film is, like you say, there's something about it. It kind of like, it feels like it captures something in a bottle, like lightning in a bottle. Yet somehow that lightning endures, because rewatching it again for this episode last night, I was just as drawn. I knew what was going to happen, though I did forget a few things. But I was just as drawn into the big moments, to the humour, because there's a lot of good humour in this film. It is, like you say, it opens up and you think, well, actually, this is funnier than it may sound. And the trailer actually drops this as more of a, for the first three quarters, more of a comedy, until the big moment right at the beginning of the film with Colin ends that trailer off. But honestly, yeah, this film is worthy of everybody's time, but if not slightly uncomfortable, depending on how you feel about things going on at the minute. But on that, let's talk about everything that we liked about the film, as we do in retrospectives. That could be, full sequences, scenes, a moment, a bit of music, the way something was incorporated. So let's freestyle now. JB, what's one of your favourite moments from Blindspotting?
Honestly, to me, the moment that hooked me was the car sequence at the very, very beginning of the film, right? Like, we get to meet Miles and Colin. We have already learned that Colin is a parolee. We see him getting sentenced. We don't know what the crime is. And then it cuts to him in the car, really good match cut of his face. They're eating fries. They're having a debate. And then Miles finds a gun. And then another gun. And by the end of the initial finding of the guns, there are 6 guns. Each of the 3 guys in the car are holding 2 guns. Colin, very concerned, because he does not want to go back to jail. He's 3 days away from ending his probation. And that whole sequence, it's so funny. And then we hear the guy, you guys got to get out. I got an Uber. And they're like, this is an Uber? And then they get out in this, on these giant rims, that's like 20-inch rims, and they're elevated up on top of that. And it's,
it does not look like a car. Ground.
Right. And I had taken a lot of Ubers the week I saw this movie. So like none of my Ubers resembled anything like that. Right. So it was like the joke just landed even harder for me then. And I just think it's such a great sequence to start the film, because we get a lot of character interactions. We get the conflict that Miles is irresponsible, is not going to listen to Colin's, please, please don't let me get in trouble. And Miles is like, no, I'm just doing Miles. I'm doing me. And as I had said, the word blindspotting right away in the sequence is embedded with that idea of it being an Uber. They don't see it as an Uber. They see it as their friend's car. Mm-hmm. And then when he reveals that it's an Uber, it's like a whole new veil being lifted. And that is the same for us as the audience. We get that joke because of it. And I think that right away from the beginning of the film, we are going to be tested with everything we look at. Everything we think we know, we don't. Think of the first time we see Colin. He's in orange. He's a black man in orange being sentenced to a crime. If it would be very easy to make assumptions about him as a person, as a character. And so from the get-go, the movie's already embedding what its message is going to be about, how we perceive the world we live in based on inherent bias, things that you're not necessarily racist by default, but that passive racism that is becoming the kind of the butt of the issue that we need to deal with here in the States, is that we have to acknowledge those passive racist ideas, and then you can remove them. If you ignore them, they're just sitting there waiting to be used. You have to be aware of those things. And the movie right away is testing you. It's pushing you in that direction. And then that blindspotting term, when we will learn what it actually means, why the movie's called that, which I think most movies will name drop if it's like an obscure name. I think this is one of the best examples of it being like impactful when they do it. It's not just like a cute little moment. It's like, oh crap, that's amazing. And then when you start to watch the movie with that definition in mind, you see how it's just there throughout the film in just so many ways.
Yeah, there's so many characters that, especially when it comes to Colin, assume, like you just said, assume. Even when he's out on parole and he's got a few days left and he's working, or he's at Miles' house with his Miles' wife and kid. Even there's moments where I know we're going to speak about where the first thing people jump to is, Colin is going to be the one who's guilty of what's happening in this situation, just because, like you say, blind spotting. The thing you see is the first thing you see is what you associate with. It's very impactful the way that is. Janina Gavankar's character Val reveals that, which I'm sure we'll speak about. But yeah, that opening is awesome because it opens with shots of like gentrified Oakland. So Oakland with this new kind of free hipster spirit, and we know that plays a big part in the film. And that opening scene was so funny. And I forgot that was the opening scene. When I was watching it again yesterday, I was like, I don't remember this. Because I was sitting there laughing away. I was like, I remember it starting at the pro and then going straight to Miles, Collins on his like exercise. But this opening, it sets up the friendship and the dynamic of Colin and Miles straight off the bat as well. Because as soon as they exit the car, they're walking and they're talking and they're having a good time. They're having a laugh. They're having a joke at each other's and other people's expense. You can tell that there's a real kinship between the two of them. And again, on film and off screen as well. That really shines through. That's in the first 4 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, if that.
Yeah, and an important part of that them messing around is they're messing around with spoken word, like freestyle hip hop poetry, and it's setting up what will be used throughout the film as a mechanism for delivering information. We get Miles does it twice, and then there's a dream sequence where Miles does it a third time, which is one of my favorite scenes in the film. And then the ending, which is the most impactful. Which I don't know how. Like I know we said spoilers. I don't know if you want to like slowly build to or just drop it wherever. But
let's fix it. Let's leave the ending till the actual ending, shall we?
Sure.
Suspense.
Definitely. So I love that sequence too, of them walking and talking. I mean, even you see Miles' attitude at Quickway, losing his mind over the vegan patty. Like it's all set up right away. That Miles is the hothead who doesn't know how to maintain. I just had a couple of former students finally watched this movie. I've been recommending it to them for a while. They finally watched it, and which should be noted, here in the States, it is included on HBO Max. So that's the new HBO service. And so I own this, but I watched it on HBO Max because I'm like, I'm paying for HBO Max. I'm going to go ahead and utilize it.
Right.
But so I finally got my students to watch it, and the first thing when I asked like, "What'd you think?" was Miles is so stressful. Was her like response to me, which I really like Miles, but when I watched it this time, I had that in mind, and like, yeah, he never is like calm and collect. He kind of reminds me of some of my old like friends from when I was in like rock bands that were always like about to do something wrong, and I was always like, "Don't do that. You're gonna get in trouble." Yeah. So like, I guess I was just used to that, but when she pointed it out, I was like very aware. Like he's never not a potential like firebomb basically. Like he's always like smoldering and ready to go off. And again, I know people like that, so it didn't stand out, nor did it make me dislike him in my previous viewings. But wouldn't like with that thought, I was like, oh yeah, he totally the whole time he's just on edge. He's ready to lose it at any moment. But some people are like that.
Well, that's what makes the film tick. The dynamic between Colin, who's like you mentioned, a black man on probation, and Miles, who's a white guy who's an absolute loose cannon. Colin has to go out of his way to be careful at every turn, whereas Miles can be as reckless as he wants without having that same fear that Colin does. The same fear that as a black man, he can't do what Miles does. He doesn't have that privilege that Miles does, and it's their kinship. Like the excitement of how close they are is completely at odds with the possibility that Miles' recklessness could really spell massive trouble for Colin, and that permeates the entire film. And it does start in that first scene, even though everyone's there kind of joking around with the handguns, and they are big guns. It's straight off, Colin is like, I don't want anything to do with this, and if you do have a gun, I don't want you to know about it. So I can't be held accountable for anything. So. And further into the film, obviously, that becomes more and more apparent and less comedic. But I mean, the first scene I wanted to mention, which stands out to me every time, is one of the funniest scenes, and it's something that Miles is very good at, and that is as a salesman. He could sell
Yeah.
a fishing rod to a fisherman who's already got three, and it's when he takes the hair straighteners, a box of hair straighteners, to Mama Liz's hairdressers. It's incredible. So again, it all comes down to that. You've got the white guy going into the predominantly black salon hairdressers, standing on their table trying to flog them old like hair straighteners and hair irons. And Mama Liz, as she calls herself, is hilarious. She just like starts shouting, "F you white people, F Alfred Hitchcock, F M Shimon Knight," and someone just shouts, "Always a twist" in the background.
Always a twist. I love that.
And there's this face off against the owner when she's coming towards Miles. Everyone looks really tense, and it's a great moment. And obviously, it leads up to Miles saying, "Look, I'll show you how that these are in working condition. We'll do a test." And it turns out that they tested it on Colin, who's lost his corn braids and has now got beautifully permed, coiffed, straightened hair. And I watched that yesterday. I was in tears watching that because Rafael Casal is so, and David Diggs, the acting in this is on point throughout. Those two are incredible in this film. And when Miles has a chance to freestyle, because he later on sells a boat as well, honestly, I found that to be one of the most memorable scenes of the film.
Yeah, and then there's a dream sequence, just to play, because you mentioned the sailboat sequence, but the dream sequence is Colin's having a dream that he's in court, he can't speak, and Miles is his attorney, and he's like freestyle defending him / prosecuting him. Mm-hmm. And I just think that scene is also, it's very stylized because it is a dream sequence, and I love the way that scene looks. The lighting in the sequence is just tremendous. It's horrifying, but also like thrilling. And I also, to go back to the salon though, Tisha Campbell Martin is the owner of the salon who's saying all the stuff, and she is I most think of her as Gina from the TV show Martin, which I loved growing up. That's Martin Lawrence's sitcom. Very commonplace in the 90s for a stand-up comedian to get a sitcom based on their material. And she was like a staple of my childhood, and I hadn't seen her in years. So when she showed up in this movie, I was like, "Oh my god!"
Damn, yeah.
And she's just like, she's so funny in that sequence, and I love how she says M. Night Shyamalan, because it's M. Night Shyamalan, and just man,
always a twist.
Always a twist. Yeah, that throwaway line, which you could totally miss too, because you're laughing already, and then that line's just there. It's so good. Which happens a lot. There's a lot of little like nuanced comedy in this movie. Like it's just little moments, little things that Colin says, like pass. He just kind of throws it off to the side or whatever. Even the scene that leads to the salon, we go to Colin's mom's house, and she's taken in. I think it's supposed to be a stepson.
Yes.
And he's drinking out of a dinosaur mug that Raphael's like, "You're just gonna let him drink out of your mug you made in the 5th grade?" And he's like, "Mugosaurus." Yes, right. He says it so like throwaway, but it's such a great line because he's got a name for the mug, and like he's clearly hurt, but he's supposed to be an adult, but he's so like, "Mom!"
And he goes and complains to his mum about it, and then she's like, "Listen, I've given up your room for this guy," and then mum just puts her foot down completely. It's incredible.
Oh, man, what Mom is such a powerful character. We only get her this one scene too, but like just the idea, like she was fighting for Black Lives Matter as a Black Panther is implied. His sister, who we don't meet, but she's off doing something. Like she gives the brochure for for Miles' kid to like learn how to be safe around the police. There's so much like, again, subtext and the serious thing kind of built into this quick framework of, Mom who's just trying to make the best of her situation. They bring up gentrification again, kind of passively, that she's not going to sell her house, but she had to take out another mortgage. But she's not going to leave now that all the good restaurants are here. Like it's these little things that feel so organic and so natural, yet they are painting this broad picture of problems that are happening in Oakland, and it's done in such a way that it doesn't feel like preachy or beating you over the head with it. It feels like it's just, this is the world that these people live in, and isn't it kind of messed up that they are having to basically fight to stay? It's such a powerful film in that way, that it's able to give you so much information about these things and feel just like you're watching, a movie. Like it doesn't feel like you're watching a documentary, yet there's a lot about this that is grounded in fact, and it's really, really I don't know. I just love every second of it. I just think it's so brilliant.
It's like tragic, sad that, and it could also be like a fly in the wall documentary at times, especially during some of the tense moments. I think it's probably pertinent before we go on to mention like the shatter point of the film early on, so we don't have to keep referring to it or beating around
Oh
it.
yeah,
But the
right.
actual, but what when Colin he witnesses the black guy who gets named later as Randall Marshall, the black man, who runs into his moving truck at a red light, and then he gets pursued by a cop who shoots him 4 times in the back. And he's about because we are more worried about Colin missing his curfew. He's got to be home by 11 p.m. Or else whoever his landlord is could let the judge know, and he'd have to go stay there for another year. Blah blah. But that moment, honestly, mate, it after that kind of opening, which is a bit more jovial, a bit more fun. That's when the fun stops in that moment, and Lopez really does a wonderful job of capturing the utter brutality of that moment, because you don't see it when you're watching it. You don't see it coming. Yes, he's at Colin's at the traffic light, the red light, for what seems like an eternity, and of course that's the whole point.
Which is a joke.
Yeah.
He's like singing. He's like, "Come on, because he's gonna be late for his
Back by
probation
11,
too." So
curfew's up at 11, and then literally like boom, guy runs into his truck, into his hood, and it goes from there. And that's like the big shatter point of the film.
yeah, and it's. I was just reading. I went back and looked at my review I wrote in 2018 because I hadn't looked at it since I wrote it, basically, and like I mentioned, like being like teary eyed in that moment, and I was so shocked because again, I went into the movie blind. I had not watched the trailer. I knew nothing about it. I'd heard it was at Sundance, and so that was one of the reasons I decided to see it. I was not familiar with Hamilton, so I didn't know. Like I'd heard about it, but I hadn't listened to the soundtrack. I hadn't seen it or anything like that. So I didn't know what I was getting into in that sequence. Because it starts with it was like, oh, this is gonna be a fun comedy because of the cars, and then a few moments later, we witness a unwarranted police shooting. A guy is running away. He's shot in the back 4 times. And then how, Colin's already afraid, witnesses that, is even more afraid. And then like the other cop's like, come on, go. And he just like leaves, but he's like, doesn't know what to do.
Yep.
And yeah, I can't believe we got, like, we were talking halfway through the movie. We hadn't even mentioned the ultimate crux of the film is this guy is on probation. He's 3 days away from being free from probation. He witnesses a black man be killed by a white officer in what looks like a questionable killing. What does he do with that? Does he report it? Does he try to like risk himself, putting himself back into the crosshairs himself and risk everything he's been working for? That will weigh on him throughout the film, which we get again. I'd say there's like 3 elements that could break this film for somebody. I think the music, or the spoken word poetry that is basically kind of musical-esque, because it seems normal. Like everyone's just okay with the fact that Miles is rapping essentially a sales pitch. The surreal moments, which I mentioned, the dream sequence, and then there is another non-dream sequence that is like we see a bunch of black men standing in front of tombstones later in the film, which because of that, I could see some people, like, oh, it's too on the nose or whatever. I don't agree, but I could see that being an argument. And then I think the end of the film, which I won't say exactly why, but I think that could make or break somebody for believability. For me, it just solidified the film as a masterpiece of art. But those things are there, and it all stems though from that sequence, and it's done so well. Poor Ethan Embry, because I like Ethan Embry. He's the bass player in That Thing You Do, and I'm a big fan of Empire Records, which he's the lovable Mark in that movie. But he's had a trajectory in his later career of playing the bad guy a lot, he's clearly a bad guy here. He's not a caricature, which is something I really do appreciate about this character. He's not in it much. We see him here, and then he comes back later in the film, and we see him kind of as like still images on news reports and stuff throughout the film. But I do also like how they handle him in the movie, though. I think that this officer, he's not made into a cartoon. He's not overly villainous. He's not like twisting his mustache as he shoots the guy. Like, there's clearly, we don't know what led to the foot chase, we don't know why he decided to pull the gun and shoot. There's no like, this movie doesn't dive into like, oh, it turns out he was like the head of the KKK. There's nothing like that. This is a much more grounded. In the moment, he probably thought he was justified, and isn't that a bigger problem?
Mm-hmm.
That is like where someone's mind can go when a guy is running away. That no, I can't let him run away. I'm going to kill him instead. And I don't remember I don't feel like they ever say what he was running for, like what crime he'd been accused of. I don't think they ever reveal that.
They had the news reports, but I was listening, but it pretty much it kind of just said, what happened at the scene, that he was a few times he was running away, got shot 4 times. But there was no real reason
talking over it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So there's no reason given, and we only found out later on that the dude was named Randall Marshall. But Ethan Embry is, for what he gets, what has to do, he's so good in this. And even when he shoots the guy 4 times in the back, and we assume he's unarmed as well, the way that the actual shot itself was framed, where Colin sees it in the wing mirror of his truck,
yes,
and then when Officer Molina, Ethan Embry, when he turns around to look at Miles, he doesn't turn around and kind of wink and smirk. He's kind of just like almost ashen-faced as well. They're both almost have a similar look on their face. Obviously, Colin is fearing for his life, again, as a black man around the police who've just shown that level of brutality. Plus, his curfew's pretty much up. And that's what he was saying when someone said, why didn't you report it? He's like, well, firstly, I was over past my curfew. Plus, I'm a black man reporting the shooting of an unarmed black man by a white police officer. What choice do I have? And I heard that, and I was just like, do you know what? I'm sure I've heard this very recently in the last few weeks and months, and it's profound, man. But like we said, the film doesn't get sanctimonious. It doesn't get preachy. But it doesn't glorify or glamorize anything, and it doesn't even really, for the most part, say that police necessarily are bad. That's not what the film's hanging its hat on. Obviously, the characters have their opinions, but the film isn't coming out to say that. I didn't take that from it. But that particular moment which sets everything off is, and like I say, it leads to a domino effect. So many other times in the films, even if it's not a complete sequence, Colin will be out exercising in the morning and he'll just have a flashback of the cop's face, or he'll hear the siren or hear the gunshots, or something will mimic that sound, and it will take him back. It's great.
I love this. I love the sound editing in this film in general, because they do that alarm comes back, and it's sometimes very subtle, or like it'll be the thing that leads into the next scene or the transition, and it's super powerful. And I think now is a good time to bring up the Blindspotting definition a little more clear. Val is studying. She's going to school. Val's is Colin's ex-girlfriend, his boss at the moving company, and she's braiding his hair after the perm scene, and they're studying, and she's using slang to memorize things. And he comes across the image, very famous image, of the 2 faces facing each other. But if you look at the negative space, if you will, between the 2 faces is a vase, and it's just shapes. It's white and black. And he brings it up, and he's like, "Oh, the face." And she points out that you saw this first. And then we later learn that the term she comes up with is blindspotting, to describe why you see the face first or why you see the vase first. And he poses such an important question is, when you look at me, will you always see the fight? Which we haven't talked about the fight yet, but we will. But that concept of blindspotting, again, I mentioned it with the Uber. You see it with Miles and Colin. You're right away assuming things. We see Colin is arrested at one point, so we have that about him. How are you judging these 2 guys based on your own experiences? How do we judge the guy who shot? We see him on Miles makes a big scene, because when they show him on the news, they show him in his orange jumpsuit, but they show the officer in his nice, his formal photo, right? And it's like, why don't you show a good photo of the victim? Because they're trying to frame it as though he's not the victim. So the idea of the blindspotting just being embedded in all of our lives, and not even, again, the concern is that you're not aware of your blindspotting. You're not aware of the fact that you are judging somebody because of the way they look or because of their style, unaware, and just making choices because you're unaware. And this movie, I think, does a really good job of bringing that up. And of course, that's where the Scorpion Bowl story should probably be brought up.
Yeah, well, I love the term for blindspotting. Just on that, the idea that you see this image first, but then, as Val says, your brain has to then jump through hoops to try and justify seeing something else and saying, actually, no, that's what I see now. It's like, well, actually, no, the first thing you saw was this. And when Colin mentions on the phone, this is right at the end, like before we get to the very, very like big ending.
Yeah.
And he's kind of ringing her up because Miles doesn't like her. Miles really doesn't like Val because he's all along he's kind of mocking her. And then at the end, he's saying, she never went to see you in prison. She never once went. She may have called you, but it was for this reason and that reason. She never went to see you. Whereas Miles did, and then we find out maybe it was for another reason that he did go to see him. But when Colin calls Val, the way he says to her, do you see the fight first? When you see me, is the first thing you think of the fight, which we're going to mention. And she doesn't say anything for 5-10 seconds, and then he just says, goodbye, Val. And it's in that moment where it's just like, because Colin's learning to move on, and Colin knows that, something's got to give in his life, whether it's this person or that person, and he's got to make choices. And just that moment, because Val comes across as someone genuinely really, really nice. But then we find out in the fight, let's talk about that she has seen things, and unfortunately, when you see something like that, it is going to completely bend your perception. So, JB, the fight scene in the alley about over the Scorpion Bowl.
Right. So, first thing is, I don't know for sure when they finish this version of the script, right? But this sequence resembles a thing they do in Ant-Man with Michael Peña's character, right? Where Michael Peña tells the story of his conversation, but we only hear his voice as we see the other actors acting. And that's what we get here. And I didn't realize this until I was recording this, but oh boy, I'm going to mispronounce his name. It's Utkarsh Abukadar. Abudkar.
Yeah, John has the best pronunciations for those.
I am so bad at this. But I didn't. He looked familiar, but I didn't place him until I saw his IMDb picture, and he's from Pitch Perfect, the first one. He's Bumper's like number 2 in the group, the acapella group. So I'm a fan of his, but he's at the moving company. He bumps into Colin, recognizes Colin, and he's like, "Dude, I've never told you this story," and it's so funny and also one of the most awkward experiences because Colin does not want the story to be told, especially because Val. This is where everything went wrong in his life, but it's the story of why Colin goes to jail. And Colin's a bouncer at a club. The hipster, which has been a theme throughout this film, is the gentrification of Oakland and like these transplants coming in, living in Oakland, making Oakland this very nice community, but kicking out the original Oakland people. Which, of course, if you haven't read through the subtext of that, is mostly minorities being replaced by white people living in fancy neighborhoods. Something that you get throughout the film.
Miles hates this idea.
Right, because Miles is already trying. He's an authentic Oaklander. Now he resembles all these transplants. He looks like all of them. And again, another element of the Blindspotting. But so we get this amazing story of the fight, and like this guy doing the voiceover. My favorite part being when he says Miles is like, "I hate my dad,"
and he calls the white guy Jason Biggs, Topher Grace, and Neil Patrick Harris, all in the same story.
Yes, it's so great. Even he drops the N-word because his friend that's with him is black. And as soon as he says it, his friend's like, "Oh no, you can't say it." It's like, "My bad, I was tripping." And he's like, "Sorry," And it's just like, again, it's that subtlety of that passive racism. He's not racist, but with his one friend, he says the N-word because of like that comfortability, and quickly realizes that, oh, I can't just say that to any black guy. And it's again, it's one of the many subtle little nods towards all the different types of passive racism or comfortability with things like that. And the Scorpion Bowl story, though, it's one of my favorite scenes in the film. It's so funny, but it's also tragic because Miles and Colin beat the crap out of that guy, and it's partly prompted by that. I can't let this guy show me up. I can't be embarrassed in front of my people. And Colin snaps. Val sees it. That when we see in the flashback, her and him like make eye contact, and her just look disgusted. We totally get why there's so much tension between them all now. And she hypothesizes that Miles only went to see him because he felt guilty because he didn't go to jail. And even when she poses like, what if when the police had shown up, they had shot you? Well, you think they would have shot Miles? You think if Miles was the one standing there, they would have, done the same thing? And it brings back the kind of the overall theme of the film is that idea of blind spotting, that, officers, again, whether it's active racism or passive racism, if the result's the same, it's the concern. If you look at a black person and put your hand on your gun, even if it's a routine traffic stop, versus if it were a white person and you would put your hand on your gun, that's a problem. That is an inherent difference of how you're treating the person based on their skin color. And again, whether that's actively, like, you're aware that you don't like black people, or you are just afraid because it's a black person and it's a passive reaction, that's something you need to be aware of. And that's what the film is ultimately expressing. And it's just done so masterfully and in such a way that can be entertaining and also moving. So I love it so much, if that isn't obvious at this point.
You haven't really sold that to us too much, but no, I mean, the fight goes from funny to frightening very quickly, because it's a drunk white guy. He orders a scorpion bowl, this big old cocktail, which the bartender lights on fire and everyone starts cheering, and this guy's like, yes. He takes it outside, and Colin's like, you got to take this back in. You can't bring your drink out. And it's a white guy. He's saying, look, don't worry, man. If you get fired, I'll get you another job. I'll get you something. Don't worry about that. He won't go back inside, and he ends up pushing Colin, and then Colin just beats the shite out of him. And Miles joins in, and when the guy catches on fire because the drink's spilled, Colin stops fighting. He's just put the flames out that have engulfed him. And Miles is still kicking this guy in the head when he's down. He's going to town on him. Yep. So you could look at it and say, yes, whilst Colin instigated it, Miles certainly finished it and maybe even gave the guy more of a beating. But I say that's all everything. Miles didn't go to prison, but Colin did. And even in that statement there were two people involved in this fight. One of them went to prison, the other one didn't. And like you say, did Miles go to prison every week, whatever it was, to see Colin out of guilt because he didn't go to prison? And this actually has ramifications later on in the film when when there's another fight that happens. But the actual story of the Scorpion Bowl incident, it starts off kind of like, because you're not sure where it's going to go. Then when you realise what the story is, you're kind of like, whoa. And then at the end, it's like dead. When it returns to present day in the reception of the workplace, it's like you can hear a pin drop, and Colin's face, you can tell that he's full of remorse. He even said, thanks for that, this was a pleasure. He didn't want this story told, certainly not in front of Val anyway. But it's just the way it's silence for a few seconds, just for everyone to almost for us to feel shame that we've been supporting this guy, and then, well, actually, look what he did. And then you can see he's remorseful. Val remembers everything again because she actually ends up finishing the story. And the guys are like, yeah, we're going to leave now. And it's like a really awkward moment in the film. And I mean that not in a, cringe way. It's just everything we've built up to know about the character. This is actually what went down. And do you know what? It's a shocking attack. But then, like you say, it's the ramifications and the subplots of it. Like we mentioned, one went to prison, the other didn't. If the cops show up, who are they taking down? Spoiler, it ain't going to be Miles. And it's the way that permeates the rest of the film, and especially when on the last day of probation, Miles basically says, because there's one scene around this time, but I wanted to save that again just before we speak about at the end, and I think you know which one it is. A very tense scene, but Miles basically says, look, stuff this, let's go to a party. We're going to go to a party. It's full of hipsters, the kind that listen to lounge music, jazz music, and quaff craft beer, artisan beer, with those kind of types. So they go to this party, and it's and they turn up in the Uber again, the massive rimmed 4 foot off the ground car. And when they turn up, these white people run out and start taking selfies with it. There's this smooth, chill out music playing. There's a 140-year-old Oakland original tree trunk. There's goat's cheese tarts, quick way vegan burgers everywhere. It's like a hipster's paradise. And the guy whose party it is the most cringe guy ever. The way he says dranks. And Miles finds out that one of the hipsters has got the same tattoo of Oakland State as him on his neck, and that's when it starts to hit home that what's happening. But Colin sees like an old friend who she used to work with, and her partner is with him. His partner's called Terry. And they get talking. Terry goes to get a drink, and he bumps into Miles, and JB doesn't end well.
No, because he thinks Miles is a transplant. Again, even Miles is wearing a shirt that was given to him moments before the big scene that we are holding off talking about. And so it's a tighter shirt than he would normally wear. He looks more like a hipster, even though the shirt has like a joke about hipsters being killed on it or whatever.
Hood.
And but he looks more like a hipster, and he has a grill, so the guy's like mocking him as a culture vulture, and he walks away, comes like to bring the drinks to Colin, and Knox goes back, and Colin realizes that he was talking about Miles, and it's like, oh no, but he's too late. Miles pushes him. Colin gets him out of the house, but Terry's not having some white boy hipster show him up, so a fight ensues, and it is a violent and brutal fight that I think is filmed really, really well. Like it just like it feels so horrifying, and Miles is calling out for Colin for help, and this time Colin doesn't come to his aid immediately. He doesn't want to hit Terry. He doesn't want to ruin. He just is off probation, not even officially yet, but he will be at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And once the fight ends and Miles is standing victorious, the shot that we see him and we see from Colin's perspective, it just shows the monster of Miles, like how dangerous Miles really is. You kind of see him in a different way for the first time. The Blindspotting, the vase has been revealed to Colin for the first time. What Val's been saying about him. Yeah, it's crazy. And then the big fight that they have in the parking lot after they escape. Of course, Miles shoots the gun 5 times in the air, making it even worse. But also Colin takes the gun. They have that that parking lot conversation where he points out that you're the N-word that they're looking for. Like, they see me and they think I'm that guy, but you're that guy. But because you're white, they don't get you. And it's such a powerful moment between them. It calls to question their entire friendship. The loyalty. Is Miles only loyal to Colin because he gives him the street cred that he so desires? Makes him not just a culture vulture, but actually a part of the community. There's so many things that you can ponder from this sequence, but the gun being put into Colin's pocket is important because we have 3 major moments of tension from the film. We skipped one to get to this part. There's one that follows this part almost immediately, and then the end of the film is the biggest moment of tension, obviously. But do you want to go to the one that leads to the party?
Man. Well, that gun has a lot to answer for, and the parking lot fight is tense, man, because these two finally have it out. There's no fisticuffs, but they are screaming. They are really in each other's faces. Miles is beaten and bloodied. He's bleeding everywhere from his face. And Colin, yeah, exactly, because Miles says to Colin, "You've got nothing to worry about. You're a clever black dude in Oakland." And like you said, Colin tells Miles, "Look, you're the N-word they're looking for." He says, basically, Miles, I've been carrying you the whole time, and you got to get a gun for protection. You're the problem. You're the problem." And Colin leaves, and Miles goes back home, bloodied up. And by say back home, it's because they were kicked out. Both of them kicked out. And like I say, Miles' son, Sean, gives him a T-shirt, Killer Hipster, Save Your Hood. And they joke about it. Like you said, it's tight-fitting, and how Miles now looks like he really fits in with the new wave of Oakland folk. And they leave the bathroom. This is Miles, Colin, and Ashley's wife. And Sean, the young Sean, has got the gun. Now, nobody knows about the gun apart from Miles and Colin, even though he's trying to deny it to anyone who wants to know about it. But I mean, Sean is what, 8 years old or something like that.
Yeah,
and he's
most,
sitting there with a gun, and he's checking out. He's holding it in his hand. He's looking it over. He's playing with the barrel, and he puts it to his own face. And the scene is probably a minute, maybe 90 seconds long. But I put it in my review. It's probably the most tense scene I'd seen that year. And even rewatching it, it's like, oh, god damn. Because again, the way that the film flips its tone so effortlessly without sacrificing story or narrative or effects, it excels. And this is a flat out, like, this is tense, as Anakin Skywalker would say. This is like arse-clenchingly tense. And because we've mentioned this before, JB, but the scene with young Sean playing with the gun and how they defuse that. Take it away.
I mean, it's I've seen this 7 times at least, and every single time that scene makes me clench, like you said, and um, I know he'll be okay. I know he's not gonna shoot himself. Which, of course, the first time I saw it, I was so afraid that the gun was gonna go off, and that would have taken this movie way too far in the wrong direction. And again, it's that just enough to make us all see the dangers of it. They hit as a screenwriter. Chekhov's gun. If we see a gun in the first act, it must go off in the third. Not only does it almost go off here, and it becomes a major plot point because that's why they get kicked out of the house. Ashley kicks Miles out. Colin does not do the loyal thing and say it's his gun. He lets Miles, rightfully so, take the rap for it.
She blames Colin. She says, "Colin, is this your gun?" Straight up.
Yeah. And he says no, and then so that's when Miles gets kicked out. Obviously, we've established enough that not only is Sean, Miles is a very affectionate father, in my opinion. I think he does. That seems to be the one moment where he seems to be trying to do the right thing in every way, even if he's not. He seems like he wants to do the right thing. Obviously, he got the gun to protect his family, but is irresponsible, so he doesn't put it somewhere safe. It's just out. And we also know that it's loaded because of the joke made in the car. Oh no, that's for show loaded. Like we know it's loaded, and so that when they get the gun from the kid, everything's okay. Ashley kicks them out. Then we get to the party, the fight, why he has the gun. They separate, but Colin does not give Miles back the gun, and so he's walking on the street, still on probation. And what happens? A cop drives by, sees a black man walking, slows down, sirens on, flash, spotlight on Colin. Colin turns. You're sitting there knowing that gun is in his pocket. What's going to happen? Spotlight goes off. The cop drives away. And the relief that washes over Colin, and also like the regret, the fear, it's such a powerful performance from David. He does so much with so little in that sequence, and you're with him. You feel everything he's feeling, because sure, he is guilty. He beat the crap out of that guy, but he probably got a harsher penalty than he should have. He did it partly because of trying to be a certain persona that is expected, and I don't think they ever make an excuse for him for doing it, but I do think that we are supposed to see that he's not a bad guy. He broke the law. And I think that's a common misconception, that a criminal is inherently a bad person, when a criminal is someone who did something wrong, was caught, and then tried and went to jail for it. Most of us have broken the law in some capacity. We just either have broken a small law and it was ignored, or we weren't caught when we did it. And it could be as simple as you speed to work every single day and you've never got a speeding ticket. Well, you're breaking the law every time you're doing that. You just haven't been caught. Are you a bad guy? Some might argue yes, if you're speeding every single day, but mostly we would say no. That's just the one thing they do that's wrong. And I think that the movie really wants us to see that Colin is not a bad person. And I don't think Miles is a bad person. I think Miles is a worse person than Colin. And it's definitely less inclined to do the right thing, where Colin is actively trying to be a better person since his experience, but he's constantly pushing curfew. He keeps hanging around Miles, despite it being very apparent that Miles is like often the cause of his problems. And that moment with the spotlight, though, just it hits all of that we've seen. And it's after that big fight. He's just maybe walked away from Miles for good. We don't know yet, And then is it all over? Is it all going to be thrown away? He's on his last hour of probation and he's going to get caught with a gun,
Miles' gun. Miles' gun as well. Yeah.
Miles' gun that he took to protect Miles ultimately, right? Because Miles shot it off in the air and he didn't want him to actually shoot somebody. And the fact that the cop leaves, we don't know why. We don't know what the reason. Maybe Colin didn't fit the description they were looking for. Maybe they got an actual call for like something.
Maybe it's intimidation.
Yeah, maybe they were just messing with him, just making sure.
Those moments of tension really hit home, and it is like that kind of. There's like once you get to a certain point, it's like a rope-a-dope. The punches keep coming from the gut, from the kid with the gun to the party where Miles just loses it, to the parking lot fight, to this moment. The tension in this scene it's like a fever pitch almost. How it, like you say, with David, and how it just sort of frames his face, and you can see the utter fear on his face, because again, and we know from our side, he hasn't done anything wrong here. He's guilty of it by association, of being at a party, of being friends of someone who beat someone up, who fired off a gun, and guilty of trying to protect that guy by taking the gun, and his family, by taking the gun off him. Yet if the officer gets out of the car and searches him, Colin's done for. He's going get back into Slammer for something he hasn't, for nothing, basically. And honestly, the way that Lopez films this and shoots it and edits it, and the use, and he knows when to hold back on any kind of music or anything, and just uses ambient noises or silence at times, really sells these moments. And honestly, that moment, and then you mentioned Miles and his home life. There's a perfect dichotomy between his home life and the image he wants to project, which is, the grill wearing Oakland original. Like you mentioned, whether that's keeping Colin on board for that reason or not. But he goes home, Miles goes home, and his wife forces him to face up to his actions with the gun. She says, "Were you scared seeing Sean hold it, And he's like, yes. He doesn't want her to call him the N-word anymore. And and we're starting to think, well, hold on, has he seen the error of his ways now? Will he come around? And to a point, yes, he does. You know what I mean? We from what's left of the film, we see a different side to Miles. So we don't know if he changes going forward, but in what we're left with, he's certainly a changed man. But yeah, those kind of rope-a-dope moments are, firstly, pivotal and crucial to the film for Colin and Miles' development. And I know it is also kind of like the conflict before the happy ending almost, but every film has that. But again, this felt earned. And like you said, the whole film, you're waiting for something to happen, because you can see Colin's trying to stay on the right side here, but Miles is constantly, a centimetre or two away from pulling him down the wrong path. Everybody else can see it, but Colin, whether he can see it or not, or just stays there out of blind friendship, blind spotting, who knows? But it's that moment when it finally comes to a crescendo, and he's back. He can pay for this. Honestly, the way that Lopez does this is very, very, very good. Not the fact that he's doing Robin Hood next as a surprise, but before we get to the major moments at the end, there's a few smaller bits that I wanted to mention. Like before the ending, which Colin, right at the beginning, Colin buys a $10 green juice, like kale juice.
I was going to bring up the green juice because he
basically buys it to impress Val, his ex, so she can see that he's changing his ways, and she sees through it. She's like, because she's very much about healthy living and healthy lifestyle. And $10, this is what's £8. That is a lot of money. Miles ribs him for it, and you know what? Actually, Colin's like, it's not bad. And this plays into the end scene. Wayne Knight. Some people may know him as Dennis Nedry. He's an art dealer, and he remembers the good old days before the new Oakland, quote unquote. And he has the boys stare into each other's eyes so they can connect and understand. And there was a few other bits with Sean, like Miles' wife Ashley. The way he looks at him whilst the news is playing the story of the shooting, and she looks worried.
And she's reading the brochure about how to train him.
And she holds his hand, and like you can tell that she's thinking, I don't want my son to grow up in this environment. The media is painting the victim as the problem. Randall, who was shot unarmed and 4 times in the back. The media are painting him as the problem. And later on, when Miles goes back to Sean's house after the trade-off the night before, Sean brings him a green juice to celebrate being off probation. He starts beating Colin, jokingly. He starts like whacking him on the leg, and Colin says, "Look, stop." Sean raises his hands and says, "Don't shoot." And Colin's face is just like, he stops, and he's kind of just keeps his eye contact, but starts to back off, and he's like, what is happening? What's the world come to when, the young black child has to say, "Don't shoot," when he's reprimanded? And there are a few more, but there's a couple of moments I thought, chuck those in, because they may not be the biggest moment, but I think they're crucial in the tapestry of this film.
Right, and that the green juice is super important because it does come back a few times. It's a running gag, it's a running joke. The last one that he has right after the scene where he says don't shoot, he had just delivered a green juice to Colin. They bought him as like a congratulation present, which again will come back in a few moments at the end of the film. It's there's just so many little things. Even I had one more note that when you were talking, I was like, oh yeah, it's worth mentioning. Well, the gentrification in photography, like the idea of memories, because the Wayne Knight character, he has pictures. His most recent thing was the eyes, and he's talking about these are people who have been moved out of Oakland. There, and he's moving out of Oakland, like because of being pushed out for gentrification. But then one of the houses they go to move, a realtor has bought it and they've gutted it. And she's going to be, flipping it basically. They're taking this rundown old house with all these memories, and Colin's looking at like pictures, and there's a football, and it's this very kind of somber moment. He's rapping about it. Again, they are slowly and cautiously reminding us that there's hip hop built into this, and those moments are really powerful. And when they leave the Wayne Knight shop, they go to pull out the truck, and a guy is parked where they can't get out. And, Miles loses it. It's very funny. He's like honking the horn. Colin's being very calm on the phone with his mother, who we will then meet moments later. But when he's with Val questions him about how he treated a customer, or not a customer, how they treated a guy on the street. I got a complaint that one of our movers, black guy with dreads, was honking his horn. He's like, that was Miles. And then they get into a fight. That's not the point. The point was Miles is clearly the one yelling at the guy. But he reports the black guy.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that that blind spotting element that's just being slowly, it's there, but it's not like he says it and they move past it, right?
She
like
kind of puts it down to his hair as well, because she's rebraiding his hair, and she's like saying, like, "Not my image, bro. Not my dreads," and that. She's basically saying like, "This is the way you actually style your hair may be part of the problem here." Because then she then goes on to say that they got a complaint that a black guy, and she says a black guy with dreads, not a black guy with dreads. Now, as if that, the two are synonymous with negative connotations, was honking and swearing. But she does it anyway. Like, she braids his hair and she wants him to get rid of the hair, and they have a nice cuddle. But yeah, I thought that was very pertinent, the way that she had to, they mentioned that they twisted it, rather than, again, Miles' white privilege comes into play, even if he is trying to rebel against that.
So we see the moving truck comes up immediately at the beginning of the movie where they're driving with it, but we see them move Wayne Knight's museum art show. I don't know what to call it, like where he displays his photography. We see him move that. We see the empty house that they are taking all the stuff and taking into the dump where they get the sailboat. And then the third house we go to move is the climax.
Honestly, take it away.
So we get to this house. Miles is kind of taking the lead, which he has not in the past, but because Colin's kind of out of it, Colin's not even in his normal uniform, because he's still like reeling from the night before, reeling from the fight with Miles, reeling from the party, reeling from the realization about Val never going to see him the same way that she used to. She's always going to see the fight first. He's just in this really bad place. He should be in a great place because he's free. Yeah. Probation's over. He's now a free man, as much as he can be,
And it's important that he hasn't got his uniform on. It plays into to the end.
So the woman says, all the stuff's inside. It's just some boxes. Sorry, I can't do anything about the alarm. It just beeps because it's, it's broken or whatever. They've almost moved everything out of the house. And Colin looks at a picture. And we don't see the picture. But Colin clearly is not okay with the picture that he's seeing. And he starts to explore the house. And he hears something, goes into the garage, and whose house is it but the officer's? And the implication to me is that the wife and kid are leaving the officer. Like, they're moving away from him, like, because of all of what's happened over the last 3 days. The officer, I think is important. He looks remorseful. But is he remorseful because he's losing his wife and his kids and he's going through this? Or is he remorseful because he killed somebody? Yeah. That is left up for us to decide, I think. But he sees a black man in his garage wearing a white tank top only and recognizes him from the other night. Like, you see it in his face. He points at him, and then he goes to make a move for his gun. And Colin still has the gun that we've dealt with now several times, and pulls it out before the guy can get to his gun and points it at him. So now we're at a standoff. Miles has pulled a gun on someone who is probably still a cop, given now I have a very strong understanding of how the union system works. Probably still gonna be a cop, even despite what's happening in the film. Colin has pulled a gun on a police officer, presumably. And Miles soon sees the picture. We find out it's the photo of the guy as a cop, like it's his, like the photo we've seen on the news and stuff. Miles looks for Colin, finds the situation, and is like, "Oh no, this is bad."
And the shoes are never foot now. Miles is almost like the one who's like, "No, we've got this. We can't do this. We've got to stop. You can't do this. You've got to calm down." Whereas before it was Colin doing that.
Yep, and then Colin, who's now he's lost it. He's so fed up. He goes, "You got the bounce." Earlier Miles said they like the bounce of it, so he's like, trying to be calm. And this is where I think, again, the scene can make or break it for you. I love this scene. I think it's one of the most powerful spoken word poems ever put to the screen. But it does kind of, it bends reality. You would think if this were ever happening in real life and the person holding a gun on somebody started to recite a freestyle, it would probably de-escalate the situation to a degree or something, but to me it just intensifies it. The passion that's coming out of him while he's doing it, the cinematography during the sequence, everything about it works for me. I am 100% on board. I think this is a brilliant ending, and I don't want to do you want to say anything before I there's one line that he says at the very end that I think is so
I'll save the line for yourself, but I mean when Colin goes into the garage, I mean, you immediately, when you go in there's a Blue Lives Matter sign up on the wall, and there's police paraphernalia everywhere, kind of like the Proud Boys in Blue. And that's not me judging the guys, but it is very made up to be, this guy is proud of who he is. He's a copper. He's there to be the barrier between justice and crime. But he's very remorseful, but his first instinct, he's off duty, we assume, or he's been suspended, we know that, but he's is to go for the gun. And Miles, like you say, Miles starts freestyle rapping, spoken word poetry rapping to Officer Molina, and it's he's rapping about the issues that he faces as a black man in society. And like you say about it could diffuse the situation, but the more and more he's getting into it, the more passionate he starts smashing stuff. At one point, he starts to almost you start to think, hold on, is he going to go like Brad Pitt, Detective Mills, and shoot him in this? Like in 7, and he gets up close to the officer and just can't help it anymore. He just screams, and there's the close-up shot. It's right in Colin's face. We are forced to look directly into Colin's eyes. We see what the copper sees. We're right up there, and that is the way that they shot. That was brilliant. But when you listen to the words that he's saying, is powerful, it's impactful, and the way he's delivering it, he isn't kind of he's not bobbing along as he does it. He's just in a moment where I can't speak for everyone else, but for me, I wasn't entirely sure whether he was actually going to shoot the guy or not, like in cold blood, end it with a bullet. He doesn't, but at one point I thought he would.
The line that I want to say,
go, yeah.
But the difference between you and me, I ain't no killer.
Yep.
Like, what a bullet that is, right? Because he's like, you look at me and you think I'm a criminal, and I technically I am a criminal. I've been to jail. I'm just off probation. But the difference between you and me is I'm not a killer. He could take your life. He could easily do it right now. And they could make it look like it was a break-in or something. Like, there's so many ways where he could potentially get away with it. But he's not a killer. Yeah. He's not going to do that. And that is such an important part. Because I think in a lot of Hollywood movies, that's the catharsis they would have tried to give us, is him killing the guy who killed the guy. Mm-hmm. But that's not what the world should do. It's not supposed to be eye for an eye. That man needs to go through due process. Now, Colin walks away. He hands Miles the gun. The officer says, "I didn't mean to." And Miles, "You sure?" And it's such a simple line, but every time I think about it, it makes me want to cry because it's so
delivered,
genuine. Yeah, it's just like, "Are you sure?"
I mean, it's funny how he doesn't say anything when Colin's in the room. It's until he goes and then he speaks to Miles, the white guy, and that's when he says, "I didn't mean it." I noticed that as well. And again, yeah, Miles is the way he looks at him. But Miles is he is just like he's almost like look, he's had enough as well. But he's just like, yeah, are you sure? And then it cuts away, and the two drive off in the van, and they have a really nice moment. They reconcile to a point. They have a really nice moment where they're just Miles again. It's Miles taking the lead. He's like, look, we've got to go to this house. It turns out to be the wife of the quarterback of the Raiders. And he's like, is there anything else you want to get off your chest? Because we only get one chance to hold up a customer at gunpoint, and you've already done that once now. So,
Yeah.
so we get that cool moment afterwards. And then Miles takes a drink of the green juice. He's like, I'll taste this stuff. And he's like, it's not bad. So it's almost like a weird character arc, full circle. But that ending,
But it's so green.
That's it. The thing is, it does look quite nice, but I can imagine what it tastes like. But yeah, that ending with Miles and with Colin, just how he controls himself, but at one point it looks like he's going to absolutely lose it. And yeah, I've got that line written down. The difference between me and you is I ain't no killer, and it is just powerful. And then because do you know what I mean? Right there and then, the cop is Ethan Embry does such a great job of feeling every emotion that he would do. Like every vein in his face and neck is popping out, and you can tell he's a man who's fearing for his life, doesn't know what's happened next, but at the same time is on the edge of insanity because of everything he's going through. Or should we feel sorry for the guy? Probably not. But the way that Colin, I can tell it's coming near the end of this discussion, just takes over that situation it's mesmerising. And again, I've got it down, not as a worst moment, but I get why people may see the ending as a whole as, of all the homes in Oakland, I had to end up in that one. And, the rapping, and people may not like that. I did. It worked for me just like it worked for JB. I get people may not like that or may just see it as stepping over the line somewhat. But they set it up. They set up this spoken word poetry and how they relate to situations via that medium. It's not like it just comes out of nowhere. It happens a lot during the film, and I think it's successful. And I honestly think the way that the film ends, where it's a fairly happy ending. You don't know what happens next, but it seems like everyone's where they need to be now, or they've got to the point where they possibly wanted to be, or felt like they needed to be but couldn't quite get there. But it does take an emotional toll to get there, though, in that final sequence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he gets to confront this monster who's been haunting him throughout the film. But it's that moral victory. It's that people look at me and they see a criminal, they see a killer, but I'm not. And it's that stamp is the Blindspotting again, because the movie opens with him looking directly into the camera. Almost all we see is his face with the orange jumpsuit. We're supposed to think of him as a criminal. Like, that's what they're setting up, is that they're setting that idea in our head from the get-go that this is a crook, this is a bad guy, and he's not. And it's just such a great use of the name of the film and what that word means and how we learn it. And again, the more you see it, the more it just stands out as just a masterpiece of writing. I was looking at Letterboxd, and a guy I've become a bigger fan of, his name's Demi Ajawibe. I believe I said that one correct. He did a podcast called Gilmore Guys, which I've been listening to because I'm watching Gilmore Girls. It's a podcast where they do episode by episode of Gilmore Girls. And I didn't realize, but Demi gave the movie 5 stars on Letterboxd, and I think his review is excellent. And just like some of his what I'm going to just read, it says, each does a great job of not just trying to paint Oakland as a bullet-ridden battleground the way Republicans choose to depict Chicago whenever it's convenient. They paint the city as it is: colorful, vibrant, exciting, communal, full of love, full of humor, full of people. They do this because they love Oakland and understand that, like any city, Oakland is not the sum of its issues, it's the sum of its people and the way they fight against said issues. And I just think that encapsulates what this film does so well. It covers so many topics and so much, but it's ultimately just about this idea of unity and being able to exist. And yes, we are going to mess up and we're going to make mistakes, but we shouldn't be buried by those mistakes forever. And that we should have the ability to redeem ourselves and try to, there's that repeated line that the guy at the halfway house tells Colin, that you will have to prove your innocence forever. That's not, I'm paraphrasing horribly, but that's ultimately the idea, is that because you are now a criminal, every second you exist, you have to prove that you are no longer a criminal, that you can follow the rules. You must prove it, because you've already proven that you can't. So now you have to always and forever prove that you can. And yeah, I think that's true of all of us, because all of us have done something wrong. So we always have to prove that we can do right. And some people get passes, and that's the problem, is that a lot of people who are getting passes in society probably shouldn't be. Miles keeps getting passes because he's the white guy. Colin isn't. And that's, the inequality of it all.
No, yeah, that's a fantastic way to sum it all up, and that's pretty much all of my major notes I had down for it. Basically, yeah. And the other one was Miles sells the sailboat for $300 after trading words on the fly with a guy in a car, and Colin on his last day of probation in the morning, he sees a recruitment poster for the Oakland Police with a smiling black kid on it, and it's just like the irony of that. It wasn't lost at all. So, did you have any more kind of quite positives before we move on?
I mean, the reality is, and this is one of the reasons I think this movie is in my top 5 like all time at this point, is because we pretty much talked about every aspect of this movie, because every aspect of this movie is a positive. Yeah. I have nothing, like, I do not think I have a complaint about this film. I do see where other people might take issues with certain things, and I pointed most of those out. But for me, like, the film just works from beginning to end. And we didn't say, but it's 92 minutes. Like, it's all of this happens in a way that doesn't feel overcrowded or like we need to expand on it. It just moves at the right pace. Mm-hmm. Everything feels very, very well thought out and structured, and I adore it.
Yeah. I was surprised when I put it on. I was like 90 something. I thought I could have sworn this was at least 20 odd minutes longer, because there's so much that's in the film. But like I say, it doesn't feel laborious, but it also doesn't feel, like it's thundering through it. Like you say, it has Lopez finds that right, strikes the right balance in terms of pacing as well. For a film which is an hour and a half long, it doesn't feel like it's an hour and a half, but at the same token, it doesn't feel like you're looking at your clock thinking, bloody hell, come on, get on with it. Really, the way it's paced, the 3 days that we see are paced so very well. And like you say, I have nothing wrong with it. I put it in my review. Very rarely or not often do you find a film which I just cannot find fault with, and this is absolutely one. Most of my faults, like yours, are exactly the same. It's what other people might see. Other people may see the ending, as I said, as like crossing a line where, it's funny that this happened, blah blah, or the other issues they may have, like with the spoken poetry and stuff like that. But that's other people. For me, for you, we're on a show gushing about it. No, there is nothing about this that's right. The only thing I can say I didn't like is that there isn't like a continuation where I found out what happened afterwards. Where does it? Where do they go from here? But in serious note, no, I can't find anything wrong with this film. So on the socials, we asked you guys whether or not you liked Blindspotting, and put out a poll, and turns out 94% of you were fans of the movie, which meant that 6% of you were wrong. And the lads over at Holmes Movies said a magnificent film with 2 great performances and a hard-hitting message. A film with astounding amount of relevancy for the world today. And the guys over at Movies After Work said, amazing movie that too many people missed out on, which is, thank you guys for sending those in. And which is what you said right up top, JB, is not enough people have seen this film. And we thought maybe had a chance for some kind of potentially maybe shot of the Oscars, whether that was just like a writing nod. It didn't get anything whatsoever, but I've seen that in the recent months, a lot of people have been championing this film for obvious reasons, saying, look, if you want a film which reflects what's going on, check out this film. But why do you put you on a spot, but why do you think this film didn't get any more recognition or any more eyes on it? Because it was certainly received extremely well by the critics who saw it. So, but why do you think more people didn't see it?
Well, it didn't get a big distribution. It did get a theatrical run, and I actually was able to take my daughter to see it at a theater locally, and so I was really excited about that. But it still didn't get like a lot of, like, it wasn't super local. Like, we had to drive an hour to see it, kind of thing. Like, it wasn't at our local theater. So it had a small theatrical run. it had almost no marketing budget. Like I don't watch a lot of TV anymore, but I don't remember hearing people talking about the trailer or anything. Carlos Estrada is the new director, and again, I do think the issues maybe keep it from being like mainstream where people not everyone's going to agree with the topics in the film, even though I feel like the movie lets you kind of make your own decisions about things. I definitely think it is leaning left, and if you are against that, then you may not click with it. And again, I think some of those stylistic choices maybe keeps people from fully grasping. And as far as like Oscar goes, this was a summer movie release, time period. I think is when it was in theaters, which often gets overlooked for Oscar stuff. Yeah. So maybe that's a factor. And it's urban, right? That's been a big Oscar so white it was a real hashtag, and while they made some attempts to remedy that, not entirely, right? Like, so, it's kind of, I think, all of those factors. And again, there's so many movies. There's only 10 Best Pictures. This was a very small indie film. It didn't get a lot of circulation. And I think part of it, as great as the name is, especially once you see the movie, it doesn't mean anything until you've seen the movie, right? Like if you hear the word Blindspotting, it's easy, people like Train Spotting. No, not at all. Great movie. Love Train Spotting, but no, I think it's easy for people to forget the name of it too. Like I have a friend who, she might be listening to this, I don't know, but she is a big Hamilton fan. Yeah. Huge like activist. Like she's involved with everything. She's kind of, I call her my political advisor because I trust her. Like her point of view always matches mine, but she's much more informed and up to speed on things. She is a history teacher to my film teacher. She's a big Daveed Diggs fan because of Hamilton. Yep. Still has not watched this movie, and I have given her a lot of opportunities to watch this movie. Now, to be fair, she has 2 kids. They can't watch this film. They're younger. It's not, there's a lot of cursing and stuff. So she hasn't had a free opportunity where the kids are definitely not going to walk in or overhear something or whatever, as part of her excuse. But I know she wants to watch this movie, and she still hasn't. You know what I'm saying? So like, here's a person who actively wants to see it, has not been able to take the time to see it. Now, I work for a amazing principal who is also very, very all about everybody deserves to be treated equally, right? Mm-hmm. Which to me is a trait that we want in all of our principals, because they are going to be principling a diverse student body in most cases, right? That's the idea. So I love that my principal is very forward thinking in that regard. And I got her to watch this. We actually had this like a roundtable meeting about a year ago where we tried to have a diverse group of teachers sit, but mainly the teachers of color mm-hmm. were leading the meeting, and kind of like their experience with racism and things, and all aspects of life, but also with students and things like that. And I brought this movie up, as I will do any chance I get, because I think it encapsulates so much of what the issues are. And so several people from that meeting have watched the movie because of me, and I would love to know an actual number of how many people have seen this movie because of me, because I am a voice for this. I will, until I feel everyone has seen this movie, I will constantly tell people to watch this movie. That was the first thing I did while I was watching Hamilton, was I took a video clip of Hamilton with Daveed Diggs rapping. I was like, if you like this, watch Blindspotting. Like, it is so important to me that people see this movie. It's a shame that it didn't get any awards recognition. I think I am one. I put a lot of stock into the Oscars, but also know that it does not represent quality. We have some great examples of Best Picture winners that don't deserve it. Crash being the one that always pops into my mind. And Crash tries to deal with racism, but it does it in really crappy ways that feels, artificial and superficial. And here is a movie that does it so well and so organically and so real. But yeah, I think all those things just kept it away from people. And what's worse, if this were on Netflix, or if this were on even Amazon Prime, like included with the streaming, or Hulu, I think more people would have seen it. But it's HBO. And while now I think more people will have HBO Max because it's more in line with like the Netflix stuff, not everybody who had HBO had it to watch movies. They had it to watch Game of Thrones, or they have it to watch this show that they like on HBO, or they watch these HBO docs. And HBO, they do bury their movies because they have a lot of movies on there. And Blindspotting isn't one that's getting like a big push. You have to know it's there. And so I think if this were on Netflix or something where it was readily available, more people would have watched it already. It has not been on any of those streaming services. You can rent it. Yeah, you can rent it on any of those streaming services, but people are apprehensive to drop money on something they haven't seen. I've seen this on sale as cheap as $5 on digital, like to own, and that I've almost bought it again, even though I literally already own it multiple times at this point. I have it on Blu-ray and I have the digital copy, but I almost bought it. I was like, I'm going to buy it again because it's $5, and I feel like it's such a great deal. I can't pass it up. I did buy it for the friend that I was talking about. I got her a copy of the movie because I'm like, no, you have to watch it. Like, I can't have no excuses from you. Like, you must watch this movie. But yeah, so if you haven't seen it and you've listened to the whole episode, I'm sorry. I wish you had stopped and watched the movie first. But please watch it. It's amazing. It's so great. It's just excellent.
There is that. If you haven't seen it, well, you know what happens, but. Hopefully we spelled out nicely for you. Tell your friend that John Mader, the drummer in Hamilton, played drums on this score. So there's another Hamilton connection. And you're talking about, as you were just saying, about other films coming out with this. And this came out 2018. And in that same year, we had Black Klansman, we had Widows, we had Sorry to Bother You, and Black Panthers. Black Klansman, which was attacking the KKK and police attitudes towards people in Spike Lee's inimitable style. The wonderful Widows. Sorry to Bother You, that was more talking about white voices and the mannerisms will get you ahead in the world. Black Panther, a lot more whiz bang, but it created a symbol. But in 2018, Blindspotting, like we said, was real. I mean, this felt all genuine. Everything about those films, I know you were a big fan of Sorry to Bother You, which was filmed at the same time as this.
And in Oakland.
Exactly, yeah, which is wild. But you were a much bigger fan than I was of that. But that's a lot more satirical. And obviously it goes completely bonkers. Black Klansman has Spike Lee's stamp all over it, so it's a similar vibe, to be fair. It's a comedy, there's comic aspects, but there's also big gut punches. But
I don't mean to quote Demi again, but I had read his full review, and he refers to Blindspotting as Spike Lee's Friday. And remember, I mentioned Friday earlier, and so I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And yeah, that's totally a great description. Is if Friday was made by someone like Spike Lee, who always puts messages into their film, that's what this is. Even the stylization of Blindspotting resembles none of his exact stylization, but that it's very distinctive styles. And Spike is known for breaking the fourth wall and allowing characters to directly address the camera, or going off to a side thing where there's just some weird side element that isn't the rest of the way the film is being presented. And Blindspotting does that with those the spoken word elements and things like that. So I definitely see like a Spike Lee influence. Having recently really dove into Spike Lee's work, especially, like I really see that. And so Demi, who again I'm a fan of, I am a bigger fan. I didn't know he wrote so many reviews, but apparently he's big on Letterboxd. So if you don't follow Demi Ajuyibe, Adejuyigbe, check him out. He's a film lover for sure.
And I've seen comparisons to Good Will Hunting for this film, like a modern Good Will Hunting, and I can certainly see that in the two leads, obviously Affleck and Damon, and then Diggs and Casal.
Even the writing element, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like Affleck and Damon wrote it; these guys wrote it. So yeah,
there's a lot of that. And I just wanted to end on to mention one more time that the acting in this film is off the charts good. Genuinely is excellent, especially when you see David and Rafael in interviews to promote this film and other work. It's like how they are there, how they are to this film is incredible. How they just turned it on like that, and props to them and everyone involved in this film for creating such a incredible piece of art, powerful piece of film. So that there wraps up our Blindspotting episode, guys. Thank you very much for listening. You've just heard Jon Berk on here. If you want to find out more from Jon or read his reviews or listen to his podcast, Jon, where can everyone find you?
BerkReviews.com, and on social media you can just @BerkReviews. I'm on Instagram, Letterboxd, and the other popular one, Twitter. My account has not been hacked.
Yeah.
If there's any request for Bitcoin, that is legit. Send me Bitcoin. No, yeah, but that's where I'm at.
We're not verified just yet. We're getting there. We're working our way to be verified, so we too can be hacked as well, like the rest of the beautiful people. Yes, do go follow John. Do check out his stable of podcasts as well, Movie Club with Corey. Shout out to Corey. And also the Bloody Awesome Movie Podcast that John and myself do weekly, and where we discuss a new release of that week, plus a bit more pop culture news. And Movie Astrology, which is our regular sort of 4 to 6 week show where we dive into 1 year in film, and we just absolutely dive straight into it, every aspect of it. So you can hear more of us in various places, but any podcast provider will have those. So yeah, John, thank you so much for coming on. Guys, if you like what you've just heard, do consider leaving a good review on your podcast provider of choice. And if you didn't like what you heard, then just no point telling anyone. Keep it to yourself. It doesn't do any harm. But the message is go and tell people to watch Blindspotting, or else Berk will be on your case. And on that note, from me, guys, thank you so much for listening, and see ya.